Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. It really helps.
Okay, so you know how we're always talking about those things happening under the radar, stuff we might miss while we're all, distracted by the big headlines of the day?
Right, those while we were distracted moments.
Exactly. Well, today we're going deep on one of those. We're diving into some findings from the GAO, the Government Accountability Office. They're like the watchdogs, making sure things are running smoothly in the government, or at least, as smoothly as they can.
Yeah, the GAO, they put out these reports with tons of recommendations for how different agencies can improve, how they can do their jobs better.
And they've got a lot of recommendations. We're talking thousands. But today we're zeroing in on one agency in particular, USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development.
USAID. Okay, yeah, they're the folks doing a lot of the work helping other countries with development and humanitarian aid.
Right, exactly. So think about things like supporting economic growth in developing countries, improving global health, and responding to crises around the world.
Important stuff.
Super important. And it's our taxpayer dollars funding those efforts. So we definitely want to make sure it's all being done as effectively as possible.
Makes sense. So what did the GAO find when they looked at USAID? What kind of recommendations did they have?
Well, out of those thousands of recommendations, they flagged a smaller number as high priority, like, hey, this needs attention right away. And a chunk of those priority recommendations are aimed at USAID.
Really? So they're saying there are some areas where USAID could step up their game?
Yeah, basically. And one of the most recent recommendations that really caught my eye, because it involves Mexico. You ready for this?
Hit me with it.
So the GAO recommended that the Secretary of State, and of course they're working in consultation with USAID, should ensure that their Assistant Secretary, this is for the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs.
Oh, wow, INL.
Yeah, INL for short. Anyway, the GAO is saying they should be developing monitoring and evaluation plans,
Monitoring and evaluation plans, huh? For what exactly?
specifically for the aid given to Mexico under this thing called the Bicentennial Framework.
The bicentennial framework, okay. So, like, big picture, why are these monitoring and evaluation plans so important?
Well, because it's not enough to just, give money or send resources. We need a way to make sure it's actually making a difference.
Right, you need to track progress, see what's working, what's not, accountability, right?
Exactly. Like, how do we know if the aid is actually achieving what it's supposed to? And that's where these plans come in.
Okay, I get it. So it sounds pretty straightforward, right? You just come up with a plan to track the aid and boom, you're done.
Oh, if only it were that easy. This recommendation actually shows just how tricky this whole thing could be. Like, creating these plans for aid to Mexico through the Bicentennial Framework.
It's a tall order.
What makes it so tough? Well, think about it. You've got to consider the specific goals laid out in the framework itself. Then you've got the different types of aid USAID is providing. Plus, you have to factor in the political and social context in Mexico. Oh, and all the different groups and organizations involved.
Whoa, yeah, a lot of moving parts there.
And things are always changing on the ground, right? So these plans can't be too rigid. They've got to be flexible enough to adapt. It's way more complicated than just checking boxes on a list.
Definitely not a simple one-size-fits-all situation.
Nope, not at all. And get this, even though the Department of State agreed with this recommendation back in 2023, as of March 2024, those plans were still under development.
So it's a situation we should definitely be keeping tabs on then. It'll be really interesting to see how those plans eventually take shape and what kind of impact they have.
Absolutely. And it raises a really big question, doesn't it? What happens if these monitoring and evaluation plans aren't, robust enough? What are the consequences?
Well, if you can't really track progress or measure impact, then how do you know if the aid is actually working? Like, is it hitting the mark or just, I don't know, disappearing into a black hole?
Exactly. And that's a huge problem because it could mean wasted resources, missed opportunities to really make a difference, and who knows, maybe even some unintended negative consequences.
Yeah, nobody wants that. So this seemingly small technical recommendation is actually about something much bigger. It gets to the core of what effective foreign aid is all about, making sure every dollar makes a difference and has a positive impact.
Exactly. And it highlights how important transparency and accountability are. If we can't track how that aid money is being used, well, it becomes really hard to hold anyone responsible, right?
Totally agree. So we've talked about why these monitoring and evaluation plans are needed, but what are some of the specific challenges USAID might face in actually making those plans happen, like in putting them into practice?
Well, for starters, development work is incredibly complex. You're dealing with so many issues at once, things like poverty, health, education, governance, and all within different cultures and political systems.
Right, and often in places that are already struggling with instability or conflict.
Exactly. It's not like building a bridge where you have a blueprint and you know exactly what to expect. Things are always changing. So how do you make a plan that accounts for all that uncertainty?
That's the question, isn't it? And it requires expertise, adaptability, and a willingness to learn as you go.
Speaking of learning, one thing I find really interesting about the GAO's work is that it's not just about pointing fingers and saying you did this wrong. It's more about prompting improvement.
Oh, I see what you mean. It's like they're trying to help agencies like USAID get better at what they do.
Yeah, exactly. It's like having a coach on the sidelines, helping you refine your game plan so you can achieve your goals.
Love that analogy. And the GAO doesn't just give advice and then disappear, right? They actually follow up to see if their recommendations are being implemented and if they're making a real difference.
Right. It's an ongoing process of feedback and improvement, which is what we want to see from our government, right?
Absolutely. It's all about making sure that taxpayer dollars are being used responsibly and that the programs are actually delivering what they promise.
Well, I think this deep dive into just one recommendation for USAID has given us a glimpse into that world of oversight and accountability. And it brings up some interesting questions about how complicated foreign aid can be. Like, how do you even measure the impact of these programs in a world that's constantly changing?
For sure. It's also a reminder that we need to stay informed and engaged with these issues, even the ones that might seem a little technical or bureaucratic at first glance. Because at the end of the day, these things have real-world consequences for people's lives.
And this recommendation about monitoring and evaluation plans for Mexico, that's just one example. The GEO has tons of other recommendations for USAID, covering everything from program effectiveness to financial management.
And in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to explore some of those other recommendations. We'll take an even closer look at the challenges and opportunities USAID faces as they try to make a positive impact around the world. Welcome back. So we're continuing our exploration of USAID and those while we were distracted moments that the GAO brought to light. Remember, we're looking at those high priority recommendations, the stuff the GAO saying needs attention, like right now.
Yep, exactly. And in this part, we're going beyond those monitoring and evaluation plans for Mexico to see what other areas the GAO has flagged for improvement.
Okay, so one that really stands out to me is USAID's work promoting democracy and governance around the world. It's a big part of what they do.
Right, like a core part of their mission.
Exactly, but it can be really, really hard to measure success in that area.
Yeah, for sure. Because you're not just talking about elections or institutions, right? It's about citizen participation, rule of law, human rights.
It's a whole bunch of stuff, yeah, like a whole ecosystem of factors that contribute to a healthy, functioning democracy.
And the GAO found that USAID needed a better way to, measure the actual impact of these democracy and governance programs.
So more than just throwing money at the problem.
Yeah, more than just that. It's about knowing what you're trying to achieve, what your goals are, and then having a way to track your progress, measure whether you're actually moving towards those goals.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So what did the GAO recommend?
Well, they said USAID needs to come up with a framework, a way to assess how effective their democracy and governance programs actually are.
A framework, okay. And did they have any specifics on what that should look like?
Yeah, the GAO said it should be tailored to each specific country or region, recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to promoting democracy.
Oh, right, because what works in one country might totally backfire in another.
Exactly. So you need a nuanced approach that takes all those different factors into account, like the local politics, social dynamics, economic situation, all of that.
A lot to consider. And did the GAO say anything about how USAID should actually go about measuring success? Like what kind of information should they be gathering?
Oh, for sure. They were very specific about that. They said USAID needs to up their game when it comes to data collection and analysis. No more just relying on anecdotes or feel-good stories. They need hard data to back up their claims.
Right, like show me the numbers, prove that it's actually working.
Exactly. It's like that saying, what gets measured gets managed. If you can't measure it, you can't really know if you're making progress.
Makes total sense. So this recommendation, when did the GAO make it?
Way back in 2016. But here's the thing. As of 2024, USAID was still working on developing that comprehensive framework for assessing their programs.
So it's been, what, like 8 years? What's the holdup? You'd think they would have figured this out by now.
Well, it does make you wonder, right? Maybe it's just the sheer complexity of creating a framework that can be applied across so many different contexts.
Yeah, that's a lot to ask. Or maybe it's hard to get good data in some of these places, especially if the information is politically sensitive or just hard to come by.
It's possible, yeah. It highlights the fact that this whole promoting democracy thing, it's a long game. It takes time and persistence and a willingness to adapt as you go.
For sure. Okay, so we've talked about measuring the impact of democracy programs, but let's switch gears a bit. Let's talk about humanitarian aid. That's another big part of what USAID does.
Yeah, humanitarian assistance, that's where they respond to all kinds of crises. natural disasters, famines, conflicts, things like that.
Trying to save lives, alleviate suffering, help people get back on their feet.
And in those kinds of emergency situations, efficiency and accountability are super important, right? Because you need to get aid to people fast.
Exactly, you don't have time to waste. So did the GAO have any recommendations about how USAID handles these humanitarian assistance programs?
Yeah, they did. They looked specifically at USAID's procurement processes, so like how they buy the stuff they need to deliver aid, all the goods and services.
Procurement, oh yeah, that can be a real headache, right? Lots of paperwork, red tape, bureaucracy.
And the GAO found that USAID's procurement process could be made way more efficient.
Okay, so less red tape, less bureaucracy, especially when it comes to those emergency situations where every minute counts.
Exactly. The GAO recommended a few things, like simplifying the procedures, using existing contracting mechanisms more effectively, and giving staff better training on humanitarian assistance procurement.
So basically, make the whole system more user-friendly so they can get the aid out the door faster and to the people who need it most.
Yeah, exactly. And this really highlights how you need to balance speed with accountability. You want to move quickly, but you also have to be responsible and transparent about how you're spending money and procuring those goods and services.
Makes sense. It's a tough balancing act. So this recommendation, when was it issued?
This one goes back to 2018.
2018, and what's the status? Have they implemented these changes yet?
They're working on it. As of 2023, they're still in the process of making those changes to their humanitarian assistance procurement processes.
So it's been 5 years, and they're still working on it. It's a reminder that changing these big bureaucratic systems, it's like turning a giant ship. It takes time.
And it's not always easy.
Right. But it's good that the DAO is keeping an eye on it. Their persistence just goes to show how important it is for USAID to be as efficient and effective as possible, especially when it comes to humanitarian aid. You know, people's lives are on the line.
Absolutely. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. We've looked at the challenges of measuring the impact of democracy programs. And then we talked about the need for more efficient procurement for humanitarian aid.
Yeah, we've gotten a good sense of just how complex USAID's work is and how important these recommendations from the GAO are. I mean, it's all about making sure USAID is fulfilling its mission, right? Supporting economic growth, global health, democracy, all of that.
Exactly. And making sure those while we were distracted moments don't become missed opportunities to really make a difference in the world.
Totally agree. It's a reminder that even the best-intentioned government programs can always be improved, and that scrutiny and accountability are crucial.
All right, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into USAID and all those priority recommendations from the GAO. You know, it's been really eye-opening to see how these recommendations touch on so many different parts of what USAID does, from, promoting democracy around the world to dealing with humanitarian crises.
Yeah, and for this last part, I want to shift the focus a bit. I want to look at a couple of GAO recommendations that are more about USAID's internal operations. Because, the way an organization runs internally, that can have a huge impact on how effective they are out in the world.
Oh, that makes total sense. Like, you can have the best intentions, the most amazing mission, but if your internal systems are a mess, it's going to be hard to get anything done.
Exactly. And one area where the GAO had some recommendations is risk management.
Risk management. Okay, that sounds kind of broad. What exactly do they mean by that?
Well, it's all about identifying potential problems, things that could throw USAID's programs off track, and then putting strategies in place to, deal with those risks.
So like thinking ahead, anticipating challenges, and having a plan in case things go wrong.
Exactly. Be prepared, right? And the GAO found that USAID needed a more systematic approach to this whole risk management thing.
Okay, so what did they recommend?
They said USAID needs a risk management framework, something that clearly spells out who's responsible for what, how you identify and assess risks, and what strategies you can use to, mitigate those risks.
So it's about building a culture of risk awareness, not just at the top levels, but throughout the entire organization.
Exactly, because risks can pop up anywhere, at any time. Everyone needs to be ready.
This recommendation, I think it was from 2017, right?
Yeah, 2017.
So what's the status? Have they done it?
Well, USAID has made some changes. They've definitely gotten better at risk management, but as of 2023, the GAO said there's still work to do. They haven't fully implemented the recommendation yet.
I wonder what's holding them back.
Yeah, it's tough to say for sure. Maybe it's just the nature of bureaucracies. Sometimes they're resistant to change. Or maybe USAID just doesn't have the resources they need to, dedicate to this.
Yeah, could be. It makes you realize that changing an organization's culture, that's not a quick fix. It takes time and effort.
It really does. Okay, so we talked about risk management. What's another area where the GAO saw room for improvement in USAID's internal operations?
What else did they find?
Well, this one's super interesting to me. It's about USAID's use of data. I mean, think about it. In this day and age, organizations like USAID are collecting mountains of data, information about their programs, the communities they serve, all kinds of stuff.
Right, but data is only useful if you actually do something with it, right? You have to be able to analyze it, pull out insights, and then, use those insights to actually make decisions.
That's exactly the point. The GAO found that USAID could be doing a much better job of leveraging all that data they're collecting, using it to make better decisions, to improve the performance of their programs.
So more than just, like, hoarding data?
Yeah, it's not about data for data's sake. It's about using data to learn, to figure out what works, what doesn't, and how to get better.
Okay, so how can they do that? What did the GAO recommend?
They said USAID needs a data strategy, like a clear roadmap that spells out their goals for data collection, analysis, and how they're going to use the data. And they also said USAID needs to invest in better data management systems, the kind of technology that can help them make sense of all this information. Oh, and they also highlighted the need for more training. USAID staff need the skills to work with data effectively, to really understand what it's telling them.
So basically, give people the tools and knowledge to use data in a way that actually makes a difference.
Exactly, because data can be so powerful, but only if you know how to use it.
So this recommendation, it was from 2020, right? Any progress?
As of last year, 2024, they were making some progress, but the GAO said they're not quite there yet. They still have work to do to really unlock the full potential of all that data they have.
It seems like there's a pattern here. Change takes time and it takes effort. These recommendations from the GAO, they're not just quick fixes.
Absolutely, and that's why the GAO's role is so important. They're not just making these recommendations and walking away. They're sticking around, following up, making sure things are actually changing, and offering more guidance along the way.
It's like having a partner who's really invested in helping USAID succeed.
Yeah, exactly. And in the end, that's what it's all about, right? Making sure USAID is using its resources effectively and making a real positive impact out in the world.
Well, I think we've come to the end of our deep dive into USAID and these priority recommendations from the GAO. I've got to say, I thought this might be a little dry, maybe even a little boring, but it's actually been fascinating.
I know, right? It just goes to show that behind all the headlines and political noise, there are people working hard to make government more effective, more accountable, more responsive to the needs of people.
And it's a good reminder that even those while we were distracted moments, they can teach us a lot about how we can make our government work better.
Absolutely. So the next time you feel like tuning out the news, remember there are organizations like the GAO quietly working behind the scenes, doing the important work of holding our government accountable and making sure it's serving the public good.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
Check the description for more info on how to attain the full list of priorities. Join X.com and voice your opinions on the priorities for government reform by engaging in the conversation. Tag at Doge and at Non-Citizen 5.